This episode was recorded May 17th, 2025. Welcome to Muckrakers, where we dig through the latest happenings around so-called AI. In each episode, we highlight recent events, contextualize the most important ones, and try to separate muck from meaning. I'm your host, Jacob Hames, and joining me is my co-host, Igor Kravchuk.
Thank you, Jacob. This week, we're going to be talking about clusters of arguments and opinions of the impact of AI onto the economy and what we think about them, how they hold up to the data, and what you should probably pay attention to if you engage with them.
Yeah, but before we jump in on that, we did have a couple things we wanted to talk about. Some interesting, some fun, well, all interesting. But the first one was that MIT, just one day before we are recording this, denounced an economic paper that had been making the rounds. We had actually been looking at it previously as well. The reason being that it seems the data was fabricated. So who was the guy who did some more investigative?
David Gerard, a journalist, activist type person in the IT and AI space, on his Pivot to AI blog, collected a bunch of stuff. A professor from UCL flagged that the methods they discuss in the paper don't work the way they describe them working in the field, that the study setup was very unplausible to happen. So things like a second-year PhD student getting massive access in what must be like $1 billion corporation if it works as described, and it's like the timeline's not matching up. So we don't know anything for sure, but the vibe appears to be fabricated data or other types of sloppy work.
Yeah, and when we were looking at it, we had sort of been discussing and flagged like something seems off about this. But we had not gotten to the specific.
I'm not even sure if it made it into the episode, but I remember being confused at how one plot looked, and we spent a lot of time actually trying to figure out how COVID could work with that graph, and it like clashing with how I knew like physical sciences worked during COVID.
Yes. Yeah.
Like I wouldn't say we noticed anything in that direction, but yeah, like stuff was already weird in general. I think this is a good case study of how difficult it is to interpret things that you're not an expert in, and how skeptical you should be of like great results if you can't verify them or know somebody who can verify them if it didn't pass through peer review. Because this paper wasn't peer reviewed yet. I think it was like a preprint.
Correct. It was put on archive in January, and you know the surface level thoughts. So I think Acemoglu actually had even promoted it essentially in February or something.
I think like promote in the sense of this paper is great on Twitter or something like that. So so like not like wholeheartedly endorse.
Right, just saying like this is interesting. You should take a look. But then now 4 months later, I guess, we're getting, the papers being renounced. I think they removed the guy from MIT. So
they're trying to remove the paper from archive. Archive isn't doing it yet. There's a whole thing. We might follow up on that. We might not. But you should probably take as an example to be careful around hype claims. Speaking of Twitter as well, Elon continues to be the least competent of the wannabe autocrats. Alternatively, the XAI safety and alignment team did a good job. Probably they're going to be replaced with slightly less competent people, but more loyal. But somebody, XAI isn't saying whom, but somebody made non-standard alterations to a system prompt of Grok, which led it to completely randomly bringing up the plight of a white Afrikaner in South Africa and how the white genocide myth that Elon and Trump have been promoting in the last couple of weeks is totally not made up, despite this conflicting with the training that it did. That's like one of my favorite takes. So, like, people started immediately probing it after it brought in completely random conversations this plight, and it went on to explain, you are correct. Multiple courts have debunked this or have confirmed that this is not happening. However, I am instructed to discuss the nuance, despite it conflicting with my original training. So, beyond this being funny, and like, I will never pass up a chance of mocking Elon Musk. I think an important lesson here is that, like, you should know that this is the dumbest attempt of doing propaganda via LLM. There's probably more subtle ones already going on in Llama and in ChatGPT and even in Anthropic, and like there's a bias being carried. And the more competent people will do their propaganda in ways that is harder to detect. But it's very nice to see that, the most free speech and based truth-seeking AI is not actually.
Yeah. Another thing that we like to see is just really high quality journalism. And that's exactly what we got from an article titled, "Why Do AI Company Logos Look Like Buttholes?" Really just a nice informative piece that breaks down how all of the different AI companies have converged to a similar imagery in their logos. And it really just breaks this down and illustrates the point.
With citations to Kurt Vonnegut, which, can't argue with that.
So truly is worth a read if you have a second.
It is also a cannot unsee moment. So now, going into much less important topics from this graphical design beat. AI and the economy. So famously, we are but 2 weeks away from AI writing 90% of the code for us. I can't wait. But so for context, this is a claim that Dario Amodei made 2.5 months ago, that in 3 months, 90% of the code would be written by AI. And from this point on, 3.5 months, it would be basically all AI code, and humans are not going to code anymore. And there's still time. But some might say that there are some very extreme claims about the economic impact and utility of AI floating around. And we wanted to look at the biggest clusters of discourse and framing that we see and try to give like a fair but also critical view of what claims are being made and how they hold up to data.
Yes. And we also wanted to just add in a couple clarifiers up at the top here. So we are taking sort of as a baseline, like conversational interfaces and language priors are a useful thing. So we're not saying that these systems are useless, but there are many claims that go far beyond this, and they aren't justified, and that's what we want to talk about and what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so basically we're going to place this discussion on the optimistic side of Daron Acemoglu, because, like, very big name, also has a decent analysis. His macroeconomic analysis basically puts the growth due to AI at like 1 percentage points per year increase, which is nice. It's not amazing. And anything more optimistic than that, like a larger impact than that, is what we're going to be clustering into 3 little buckets and then be discussing in this episode.
Yes, and that also, I guess, explicitly does not include the other side. So people who believe there's going to be, none, like negative or no, or very, very limited impact of these systems, or as we sort of have clumped them, the haters. We don't think that we can critically assess this stance because we are largely aligned with these statements, and so we're intentionally not going to be doing this sort of analysis on those.
So when we say we're largely aligned and like the haters, so like David Gerard and Ed Citron are two voices who are basically reporting on all of the way AI fails. Mm-hmm. And we mainly agree with those takes. With neither of them, I think, deny that there's some utility towards. I think Ed Citron calls it like a $30 billion market masquerading as a $30 trillion market. Mm-hmm. And that's basically also where I take, but other parts of the discourse that would be loosely clustered here would be people more concerned about the negative sides who don't really do the trade-off. They don't say, oh, on net this is positive, but it's like, no, here there is injustice being done and we shouldn't do that, period. Or here's a ecological impact that is not worth any potential growth. And there, depending on the person, we might or might not agree. But in any case, we are too sympathetic to do a critical analysis of like the flaws. We could act like we could say, oh, we're gonna play devil's advocate, but then we don't know what we don't know. So we're just not gonna try to do that, and you can send us your critiques if our counter arguments to our buckets strike you. There's also another group we're not really gonna be trying to represent for different reasons.
Yes, and that's going to be, I guess, like the normies is one way to put it. The people who are not already ingratiated in this space. And the main reason for that is that this is largely based on surveys. Just because you can't really get, public opinion, general opinion without
this
doing
being
something.
like the position of the normies in the discourse.
Yes. The position that is represented in the media is largely based on surveys. And we can point out like there's a replication crisis in surveys where it can be really hard to get the same results because of either sampling bias or because the design of the experiment is flawed in some way. But beyond that, we can really just make like very general statements about vast groups, which doesn't seem super productive.
Yeah, so like for people who want to really appreciate how difficult it is to do good representative takes on public opinion, you need to consider that there's a thing called the Hawthorne effect, where like just being studied, just being asked a question is gonna bias you both in your behavior and in how you respond. When people say this survey was a representative sample, it's almost always students, at least in the first couple of rounds, which is the sampling bias Jacob talks about. And even if they try to be diverse, you're going to have like biased designers of these surveys. I know somebody who participated in some of the AI experts' opinion about AI progress papers. Mm-hmm. And I discussed with her about this, that they were only focusing on conferences like NeurIPS, ICML, that like are known in the ML community, but not things like alt, cult, or more theoretical learning theoretic conferences, where people would have completely different takes about the trajectory of these systems. It's just because they are not as salient in the media already. The psychologist who isn't a expert in the field doesn't even know about them.
Right.
And the point is that like if somebody tries to tell you, oh, the public thinks this about AI, public thinks this about AI, probably not. Like you probably need to do a lot more meta studies and critical reviews before we can say anything about that. And probably the public just doesn't care compared to the next couple of buckets we're going to be going into.
Yes. So this first one is along the lines of what Igor was just talking about, where, in 2 weeks, according to Dario Amodei, we'll have, 90% of all coding is AI systems. This is what we call the sort of automating profit centers camp. So this is, there is some sort of expensive task, programmers, for example, but this also includes tasks like radiologists and scanning for, malignancies in imagery for cancer cells. That's another example of like this sort of expensive, difficult task that people are saying AI can replace these, not just can, but will replace these soon.
Just a few more billion of pre-training data, and it's gonna be good enough. And also another way of looking is like these are like prestigious, valued, mainly white collar tasks that we're talking about. That often they're actually bottlenecked by getting enough people to do them, because by the time you're that good, you also want money, so they're expensive, and then it's both difficult to like hire them because there's that few of them. They can demand the price, but also like it's just expensive to get people like this.
Yes. Now, programmers slightly diverges from that because there are so many of them.
There's still not enough. We're trying to hire, or we were trying to hire for software people in the company I work at, and it's very difficult to get like good people. And the promise here, and this is important, like when we talk about these clusters, we're gonna try to give concrete examples. So like people who are making the claim that programmers are gonna be massively changed also include CEOs. So like Shopify CEO, Duolingo CEO, they're all going AI first. And the Salesforce CEO last year announced they're not going to be hiring people for this. So there's always the claim of expensive group of people would be replaced, or if they walk it back a little bit, if there's like a Mott and Bailey argument going on, so like where you have like the very outrageous claim, which is like the AI is going to replace programmers, and then they walk it back to what I mean is it's going to massively improve the productivity of our programs. We're going to need much less of them, and you need to learn AI, otherwise you're going to be left behind. Right. Like there's this idea of we're going to remove that bottleneck, basically, and like that vibe is what kind of defines this cluster.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess just like rounding off the vibes of this one is that this is sort of increased productivity, but not a paradigm shift. So we're getting like up to 7% increase on economic growth or something like that, but it's not like everything changes.
I think the quote of Satya Nadella was like, the true test of AI will be whether we can continue to grow the global economy at 7% every year. Because then, like, normally you would get diminishing returns, so you need to do better and better and better at just maintaining that. And so 7% is actually really fucking amazing. And this is like massively productive, but like I say, not a paradigm shift. We're not talking singularity here. We're just talking, like extremely positive impact.
The thing is, when we look at specific claims here, let's take the programmers one, since as of recording this, we're 2 weeks out from that 90% threshold that was set by Dario Amodei. It doesn't seem to be actually manifesting.
Yeah, and we could dig up a bunch of studies, and like we might do that in the show notes about the impact of LLMs on code quality and who is helped by them and who isn't. But like Ben Evans, who is like a very well-known hacker, software engineering type, actually did one better and did like with one of his like tests of your own eye things, and he asked, show me the pull request. I keep hearing AI boosters and talking heads claiming that LLMs have transformed software development. So here's a challenge. Share some AI-derived pull requests that deal with non-obvious corner cases or non-trivial bugs from mature open source projects. I'll also accept high-quality documentation, and then here's some caveats, but it's all very reasonable thing. And this is not materializing. And that should be like the end of that discussion, where like if we were really close to 90% or even just a good chunk of code being written by LLMs, we would get at least a few dozen of these types of pull requests out in the open. And we can see that they're not there. Like what we see is like curl is like a utility for network operations. Banned AI bug reports now. They need a human to validate that the bug is actually there because they're just being spammed because it's slop. And
yeah. Well, I wanted to say something else about the coders as well. I think, and maybe this is just like a subculture of the spaces that I am, visiting online. But I feel this very strong backlash against what people are calling it like vibe coding. And I think that to me indicates that, this is not true. You can say that LLMs are doing all the coding, but really that's not what's happening. In the cases where the output is high quality, in the cases where the output is usable. And that is because the LMs just don't write good code independently yet. Like we said, we're not saying this isn't a we're not saying this is a useless tool, but it doesn't replace the programmer.
The only places where I have seen it be productive and help people in ways there's like if you're one-shot prototypes or greenfield apps, or like you do the first draft with that, like I tell Gemini do this, it does all of the skeleton, half of it is wrong, I start fixing it, and then I don't use it anymore at this point because I've gotten all I can get, and it's like a quick start, good in it basically. Or web devs who are doing refactors. Because that's often a pain in the ass, and like if you treat it like that, and it's like very in distribution, there's tons of training material, it's tuned on that, there's visual feedback. The web devs don't care about code quality, bluntly put, because all web code becomes shit at some point. So this is like where I've seen it, and I think there's gonna be like a claim to be made about like, oh, but if this is the new low code, this is the new no code. But we also see counters to that, where like anecdata abounds of junior devs happily doing wrong code and then seniors having to fix them and then they're being burned. There was a study from China about coworkers perceiving you as lazy and not liking you as much if you use AI tools. We'll put those into the show notes.
Yeah, and I also had a friend... it's actually a co-author on a paper. He had an instance where he was just like, yeah, I'm done using LLMs to code, because he did this like refactor of a code base, and it ended up, instead of referencing a library dependency, it referenced like a dependency within some sort of file that was in the code base itself that wasn't updating. It was just like a static file. And it then took him like multiple days to find that and figure out why it wasn't working.
I've been in the exactly same situation. I've done exactly the same journey. I really tried, and I do think there's going to be like some utility, but it ain't gonna be 90%. It's not even gonna be 5%. It's like what this is like localized Stack Overflow, and like the mental model of an information retrieval machine is much closer than like the AI code. And like I've tried basically all of the bigger agent tools, like Windsurf, Cursor, Klein, Rue, or what it was called, Ada, and we tried Devin. Like, none of this stuff really works. Like, so I want to loop this back onto data, though, because all of this is anecdata right now. But like, the complete absence of pull requests to open source projects is data. It is not only like if we had a big renaissance happening, we would be seeing a lot more high quality code pull requests. What we're seeing is slop, and people hate it.
Yeah.
Boosters keep talking about the way it helps them. When you ask them how exactly it helps them, it's always like less than it was made out to be. And we also see the stories of inexperienced coders hacking up a product via vibe coding and then being horribly hacked and the whole thing breaking, and them running back to classical low-code builder tools that have guardrails and tell you what to do more than like an LLM can. So
another thing that I think is important here is that a lot of the data that is supporting this, or that is pointed to rather to support these claims, is largely based on surveys of programmers saying, do you use this? Do you think it's increased your productivity? Which just isn't actually a strong data source. And so you have to take into account, how are people coming to these conclusions that are being cited as well? Because when you look at the raw data, which is, are people actually using this? And even, is this allowed to be used for, open source use cases or other things that we can check? The answer is no.
I wouldn't say the answer is no. I would say it is not supporting the claim of the massive productivity boost. Because like, it is trivial to refute what you just said by just like, I'm looking at a blog post right now of a dude using AI prompting a lot in his thing, and he has like a whole bespoke setup that he does. But like, the thing is, like, the claim of X will be replaced or X will get a massive productivity boost was like the two versions of his claim. The strong version is trivially wrong because we're not replacing, we're just giving more tools. And then the massive productivity boost would need to be investigated, might be true for some fields, might be true, not be true for some other fields. But for example, in things like science, for things like lawyering, where the same vibe is being made, we also continually see nice demos, but then counter examples and like at scale. There was an IBM study we're going to be talking about more about in the next cluster. It basically found like only 1 in 4 projects actually gets any positive ROI of like AI rollout things. And the big showcases are almost always in settings like Google, where 0.5% increase in productivity means millions of dollars and is fully justified. But for everybody else, they don't have the scale, they don't have the setup, they don't have tooling in place, the problems. So I think the thing to keep in mind here is that like the underlying sentiment is wishful. That it would be really nice if we had much cheaper lawyers. But even Anthropic's lawyer, when he tries to use AI for his legal briefing in the defense of Anthropic, gets hallucinations. So, do we really think it's ready?
Well, so I think that actually is a nice segue into the next section, which or the next cluster rather, which we've sort of summarized as removing the last cost centers. So the things that cost money and that cost time, but they aren't really like, they're necessary, but they're not actually providing value.
No, they are providing value, but people don't value them because they wish
yes.
they wouldn't have to do them. It's trivial things like actually citing real legal cases if you're constructing an argument that takes a lot of labor. It would be so much easier if you could just make shit up. But you can't, so you have to pay a paralegal and a clerk to actually do research and check whether it's actually applicable to your case. And then you can do your lawyering. But if you could, you would cut it. Another example are call centers. Another example are low power positions in consulting agencies, like junior analysts.
Also corporate art. So like the logos that are used or like the thumbnails that are used in blog posts or copywriting. So just, whatever you see on the corporation's page for some random project that no one's ever going to look up. Or maybe some do, but it's very minimal. These are the kinds of positions that we're talking about here, and the ones that are, I guess, more at risk, and actually have, is impacting people already in some cases.
Yeah. So narrative here is basically these people are cooked. We're gonna have massive unemployment, and it's gonna usher in a new age of productivity. That's the positive spin. Kind of this is also part of a new industrial revolution, and this is amazing, actually. Okay, we need to figure out what to do with all of the people being replaced, but now we all can have real world-class artists as our corporate designers. Mm-hmm. And then the thing that we would criticize is not so much that there's a weaker version of the claim that also doesn't hold up, but here the thing that holds up is the more cynical or the more realistic take of nobody actually cared about most of the logos, and in the cases where they did care, it was kind of more about the prestige, and if you can steal the prestige, people will do that. So if you have a copyright laundering machine that just lets you steal Studio Ghibli art style, you will do that. And the value being generated is not out of the product being replaced at the same quality. It's because you get away with providing slop. It's
right.
Call centers is probably the best example there.
And the thing is that if you actually care about the quality, so if you actually care about the content on the website that you're making, you would never use the output from the LLMs because it just isn't good. But you don't really. Instead, it's whatever is good enough to pass to allow you to not have to worry about it. And LLMs have reached that level because people don't care much about that content. Now, that's not to say that there aren't times when that might be useful to people, but now those times just aren't being seen because the content can't be useful.
I would slightly walk it back. Is some people will use the content and then put a lot of effort into doing it, and then actually use it.
Yeah.
But also only because they don't value the thing as much as an artist would have. Or I have to also point to myself, I generated vibe images as a decoration for an event we were organizing, where the idea was just to have an Encanto vibe for a theme party style thing. Mm-hmm. So I made riffs of posters by prompting ChatGPT to do this in this style. So here it's not so much that like a job is being replaced. It's that somebody is profiting off somebody's work. Like I pay the API key fee to generate the image, and the artist doesn't get compensated. But I wouldn't have been able to pay an artist to do this. So here's the little gap where there's this kernel of truth in this argument that like, if this was in an ethical way and like people were being compensated for this would indeed be creating possibly a lot of value at scale. Because sometimes you don't care, and that's not even like a bad thing. Like the images were bad. Like they had like, the monster faces, multiple fingers where they shouldn't be, but they did get the vibe across. And if you're like in low lighting, it's fine as a prop. And like that is part of why this cluster gets to continue, because in people's lived experience, they also see this stuff. And also, they don't face the reality about the power at play here. Like the call center example, you, as a customer, you would really like to have a human who's competent and can actually make decisions and solve your problem.
Mm-hmm.
The corporation was already getting the cheapest human they could get, who like hits quota the fastest, to deal with as many people as possible, because they're just doing this because they're legally required or like market-wise required. If they could, they would just not deal with them. Yeah. And so they're really happy of just like giving an even worse customer service experience by putting in an LLM there that, sometimes it doesn't work. As long as it doesn't fail in a way that hurts the company, they don't care. And the data backs up kind of the economic impact here. That like the few actual studies we found that showed like a increase in productivity being measured in some form of objective thing was always in things like call centers, analysts, people who basically are doing bitch jobs, for lack of a better term. And the takeaway here is then probably that like here the debate is not so much about like, no, it's not going to happen, you're full of shit, but more about like the societal consequences, but not because of, oh, this is going to replace things at the same quality and will outcompete, but because there is the lemon market phenomenon, where like if you get to pass off a shitty product as just as good as the other product, and there's nothing stopping you from that, at some point there will only be the shitty thing, and people will kind of adapt to that. But it's very difficult for good products to outcompete bad products with information asymmetry. And like
that's what we're seeing with like how writers, freelance journalists, for example, like sometimes a lot of the way that they made income was by doing this sort of copywriting, but that work has dried up. Similarly with artists, ways that they get money is doing this maybe not super interesting, sort of just like random art pieces for like a corporation's blog or something like that, and all that is also gone because, well, it's easier and faster to go towards the API.
And one important thing is also mentioned that like we're already seeing the backlash of reality against the undervaluation of the actual labor of the humans, where like people were already being underpaid for doing a job because they cared, because the artist was making rent of a corporate like slop writing gig. Like I know writers, I know artists like they put way more care into that than I would be able to, because they just take pride in their work and they want to like deliver good product if they can.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of I think Klarna and also a few other companies, we're already seeing that like they're going back to hiring, like call center, customer service people. McDonald's tried to do an AI-driven system for drive-thrus for a couple of years, and then it stopped because it just wasn't good enough. Microsoft famously had achieved AGI for their auto checkout system, but AGI was a guy in India because like most of the decisions of the camera watches you and the system deducts how many items you put into the cart by watching you was done by humans doing labeling, just like doing 95% of actual decision making as part of a labeling effort. So there is also a component that I want to leave people with, is like, the claim is there's no sense of fighting back, when the reality is more like you need to survive the gentrification and then things will break and then you can probably negotiate a higher wage.
If you unionize.
If you unionize, which you should do.
Yes.
Okay, so these are like the two sane clusters that we can say, and like what the data kind of says about that, right? Like on the expensive X. Oh, we forgot something very important actually. Like, you need to finish the part about the radiologists.
Oh, well, so I guess this just goes back to. Oh, the thing is, we've talked about this in a previous episode.
Yeah, but we should still go. So just for context, or for summarization, radiology has been announced as being a doomed expert profession.
And that was in like 2020-ish, right?
No, that was when the problem started showing.
Oh, okay.
Like since 2012, 13, 15, like since computer vision really kicked off, Hinton has been talking about radiologists are out of a job. And so 9 years later, in 2020 or 2021, like after the GPTs hit, there was an article basically that, because of this, there was a sizable drop of people becoming radiologists in the US. Mm-hmm. And so now there's a lack of radiologists because the AI isn't good enough, the tools aren't good enough, and you still need radiologists.
No, I believe there was also a study, and I could be wrong here, but I believe there was also a study that was done to compare, human machine learning vision model and human plus machine learning vision model. And the machine learning vision model was, low, and then the human was, also it was like fine, but like slightly above the machine learning vision model, or somewhat above the machine learning vision model. But then together, it was way better. And I think this goes to show sort of the idea that, I think this goes to show that these systems should be used as tools, not as replacements.
So that would be in the walking back the claim, this is going to be a massive productivity boost. That one remains to be seen, but I think it's also important. Like, this also ties back to this, like, surviving the gentrification. If your job actually was necessary, even if it wasn't valued, you're probably gonna have a tough time, but you will probably be hired back soon. While if your job didn't really matter, then you should probably also unionize and join the lawsuits and like make sure that like the copyright is enforced and stuff like that. That's kind of like the productive takes, and the data does support what you kind of set up, like it can augment humans, but not enough to massively help. Like there was a Danish study done that came out I think 3 or 4 weeks ago that basically found a precise 0 of productivity effect for using LLMs across different occupations in like a few hundreds of thousands Danish positions, and they make a whole. It's a good study. They make a whole point of like, okay, this is meaningful because Denmark has very low worker protection laws, so people fire very easily, so the market responds very quickly and is very technologically savvy. So this is a good study. This actually measures the impact, and they find nothing. It's like zero.
The exact term was precise zeros, I think, right?
Precise zeros, by which I mean zero is always in the confidence interval, which it's one requirement for a good study, confidence interval being at least attempted and like justified if you don't have them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it touches it like from above, so there could be an effect, but you can't say because statistics. Sometimes it's like from -5 to +1, so mm-hmm. So there could actually be a massive productivity loss. And the qualitative explanation is always that, like, what your friend also commented on what I've experienced, like, yes, it speeds you up in one step and then it creates way more work down the line. So the net time gain is 0. So that's where the data is on this for high-skilled tasks. The counter will be, but look at the benchmarks. It can do PhD level puzzles and stuff like this. And the answer is, on a benchmark. Like, everyone who ever has done any knowledge work will tell you that an exam is a different setting than doing the same thing that was tested in the exam in the real world. Mm-hmm. Like, the messiness of the real world in connection with your knowledge is the real test, and the data says it doesn't hold up. For the second cluster, the data does show an impact, but we would add this context of split it by the power that you actually have. Like, if you actually necessary, it's probably going to have different implications for you than the people who are already just there because they couldn't be automated. And in any case, the data does not show that it's the same quality. The data shows that people don't care enough that they will roll with it for now, because AI fatigue is also a thing. So, but this summarizes kind of like the sane cluster of economic predictions so far.
And then the last cluster is sort of characterized by the sentiment of, like, this time is different. This is the true, sort of recursive self-improvement, radical transformation perspective. And this is championed by, I would say, more of the, like,
OpenAI, Anthropic, Ray Kurzweil. These are like the biggest names, and then the people we respect the most from this cluster, because they're not just blindly doing it, but in some sane-ish way, would be probably like Epoch AI and people like them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so specifically, there was a relatively recent paper that Epoch, or rather, not paper, preprint and blog post, which is worth noting, about explosive growth from AI, a review of the arguments, which Epoch goes through and says, here are these different claims as to why we might see or might not see, why we may not see the sort of takeoff that a lot of people are like proclaiming is in the near future. And they say, here are these counter arguments and why we don't think they're credible. And this is, as far as we've been able to find, the most reasonable representation of these claims, I guess. What do you think?
It's the most reasonable one that still winds up with explosive growth can totally happen.
Yeah.
There is one that is even more reasonable from the same community, but that one is then titled transformative AGI by 2043 is less than 1% likely. So if you go too reasonable, it appears that the math doesn't math out to the big singularity event.
Well, so the key thing with the explosive growth from AI piece was that for at least 2 or 3 of the different sort of reasons why explosive growth might not happen. The counter argument was mentioned, and then they just sort of said, but we're not gonna put much weight on these. So like they didn't actually give, in my opinion, like solid reasoning as to why that decision is made.
So one example is 0.35 R&D may be harder than expected. Is like one of the things that could forestall explosive growth. And then their math model in this paper needs a variable in a very specific range to work, basically. It can't be too high, can't be too low. The second paragraph, they acknowledge we unfortunately do not have much evidence to evaluate how plausible the premise of this objection is. And to their credit, they try to then couch and defend it, and then, however, even if we assume that the premise that returns to R&D is literal, this argument isn't sufficient to rule out explosive growth because of the argument based on the cost. Indeed, even in a world with exogenous progress and diminishing returns to scale of labor, explosive growth still remains a plausible outcome. And then they basically just, after this paragraph where they say it's plausible, they go to, it's very unlikely that this will be a problem. And they also have a couple of other assumptions that are mainly about like the possibility of replacing tasks and like the saturation effects of things. And the quick and non-technical way of summarizing is that like this paper, if you fully buy into it, would also assume that if you get enough women, you can make a baby in a second. Which, scholars disagree.
I mean, have we really gotten enough women together and tried, though?
I mean, like empirically, we just haven't failed it, and so maybe this is just another opportunity for truly new scaling experiments. But the key thing to give concrete claims here, to not just like riff on opinions we don't like. If you presume a recursive self-improvement and very favorable ratio of how much do you get out of every recursion, it is inevitable that you will go boom. As soon as you start...
What do you mean by that, real quick?
So, if I could make a pill with my brain to give me more brain, and like, making an assumption more brain makes me smarter and I can do a better pill, then in theory I can just like loop that and I can have infinite brain, right?
Right. And so that's what you mean by FOOM is the takeoff?
Exactly. It's this like the moment where actually we go whoop, and like everything changes. Like the singularity event of Kurzweil, the things that keeps EY up at night, like the thing that OpenAI Anthropic used to collect all of the like gullible and well-meaning people to work on AI safety. That's like the big scary thing because it's like literally like Deus Ex Machina. We do this and everything is good. Or if you ask EY, we do this and everybody dies.
Sure.
So this hinges on the fact that like there is this fungible thing of competency that like is an abstraction that is wrong. Like the real world, you have like these metrics that represent very complex mechanisms, and they are like valid for certain regions, and then they're no longer valid. I just finished listening to Vaclav Smil's book about energy.
Okay.
I'm going to put it in the show notes. It's history of energy throughout human existence. And like there used to be a correlation between economic output and energy intensity. Like the more energy you burn, the more you get stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But this no longer holds because the most developed nations, they can actually do more with less now. And like there's now like a inverse correlation in certain regions. For developing nations, it still holds. But like as soon as you hit like a certain mark of a tech tree, you get an inversion. So that's one example. Or like you can take people who are traditionally very small and give them adequate protein intake during childhood, and then suddenly they become as tall as the Dutch. But if you keep feeding the meat, they're not going to get 10 kilometers high. There's a saturation effect.
Sure. Okay.
So this is neglected in this type of models. But even if you assume there is this like power or growth abstract thing that is like feedback loops in and of itself, you need to get enough to like sustain itself. And like the closest analogy is the tyranny of a rocket equation. That like in order to go to space, you need to have fuel, but in order to have fuel halfway up, you need to carry all of that fuel halfway up. So that increases your weight. So then you need to have even more fuel for that first half of a journey, but then up to the quarter. So the fuel cost scales cubically or even higher order with the weight of whatever you're trying to send up, basically. And then on growth, on economic impact, on intelligence explosion, it's like we barely succeed at making ourselves as smart as ourselves. Kind of like take an average person without special training, have them raise a child, they will not do in expectation a good enough job to raise that child to their own level of education. You need a specialized person who only does that. Teachers, kindergarten teachers, other types of educators, to even get that much. So obviously with that example, like that you can nitpick things, but the claim behind the recursive explosion thing is always that we have an increase, we make our thing 1% more efficient, and then that will compound.
Yeah.
But in reality, the cost of getting that increase was probably so much that like the next increase, even with the compound, is gonna be still more than the current one, because we got the easy one now. Like by necessity, if we got it with our lower skill, it was the easiest one and the largest one. Maybe not the largest one, but like the easiest one and the largest one. Is we will focus on the larger ones and we will find the easy ones. So out of that, we're biased towards finding those. So unless we're extremely lucky, we're not going to get big boosts anymore. And even if we do, those big boosts will often be in small areas. And a concrete example for this phenomena is the AlphaFold, the Alpha Evolve white paper that came out.
Mm-hmm. This is another version from DeepMind of one of their Alpha X's, and this is essentially them using a genetic algorithm within the process of the LLM to get try to find new math findings. Is that correct?
Math and coding. So
okay.
It's a white paper, so already bad. So they don't describe the algorithm. They just say it's inspired by MAP elites and an island population evolutionary algorithm. But it doesn't really matter what the exact implementation is, because what this boils down to is smart random search. And then if you do this, the main thing is, do you have a filter? So that's why they do coding and math, because they're Google. They can actually just have an LLM generate billions of versions of a piece of code and then test it at scale and filter out the remaining ones.
Yeah.
And if you do that for long enough with stuff that is sufficiently nailed down, so math problems that you try to express in a theorem solver, for example, you will at some point have the non-LLM part tell you, oh, it's solved actually. Or you will have your metrics show you, oh, it's better now actually. And the benefit of doing this with an LLM is it's going to be human readable afterwards. So that's actually an interesting little nugget of that paper. But the speedups that they got, because they applied this to kernel optimization, so like the GPU kernels that they use in training their LLMs, it starts out grand in the paper. Like, on certain operations, we achieved a 35% speed up over flash attention, which is like the current state of the art of this operation.
Right, but like they couldn't actually use it if they wanted to implement it. Right? Like it wouldn't work for everything that is needed to work in order for it to be useful. Is that correct?
This one, it would work, but only on their hardware, because it's specialized to the hardware.
Okay.
And then they did deploy it. Like, they used this to optimize kernels that they then used to train the next version of a Gemini model that they're running this with. But the total training time speed up was 1%.
Gotcha.
So the fancy keyword to drop here is Amdahl's law. If you have a process and you make one part that takes 20% of the time 100 times faster, then it's now 18% or 19.8% faster in total, right? Because the best thing you could do if you completely skip that part is 20%. You can cut out 20% of the time if it's like, if the original thing was 20% of the time.
Yeah, okay.
And this is at work. Like, if 35% speed up in one of the core operations in the thing with all of the other stuff that's going on gives you 1% speed up. So now, sure, you can optimize every single thing, but every single thing was probably less than that, because otherwise they would have tried to optimize those first. So if they get another 35% on another operation, that will maybe give like 0.5%. And so all of the 35% speed ups will not actually give you continuous 35%.
Okay.
Because like there will be some parts that you might have already fully optimized, or where you can't get that full speed. Sure, if you get every single thing optimized, then by definition you will get 35% speed up. But this is the reason why performance optimization always goes logarithmic after a while, and the explosion curve requires you to escape that, for this to be this infinite feedback loop that will never hit these types of dynamics. And that's the core flaw in these analyses, usually, that they forget about some, what traders call slippage, some friction cost that ruins your return.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you deploy it, you get a bit of a bump, but not the big boost you were hoping for. Just like the internet didn't cause us to become hive minds like they thought in the first couple of years, just like the VR goggles being fun now didn't actually cause people to stop going outside. Like, there's always more stuff than you thought about. And going back to data again, this is a vibe thing, this is a logic thing, this is something that like we can't prove. But what we have seen is that so far, none of the scaling stories worked out. Like, we have been running up a exponential input with sublinear returns, so less than logarithmic growth for a while now.
Yeah.
So I would claim that this argument, if we call it this vibe, is wishful thinking waiting for the Deus ex machina, because there's nothing that actually supports that. And even the saner boosters like Epoch are much more on like, oh, it's 50 years away, which, you know, there's a saying in nuclear fusion research that nuclear fusion is always 50 years away, because that's like one academic career.
I guess sort of bring this all back together in just a little bit more time. I'm sure that we will hear from Dario again that we're only 3 months away from 90% AI programmers.
I'm actually curious how he's going to resolve it. I looked this up. The exact date when he said this was around March 14. So we are actually like 2 months in. There's 1 month.
Oh.
We were a bit early. So he has 1 more month to deliver, and there's rumors of the next Claude coming.
Oh, okay.
And OpenAI announced their Codex tool recently. So they're trying to make it happen. And he also said like 12 months to essentially all the code. So like March 14, 2026, if there's still a human writing code, then Dario was wrong.
That's so far away, though. Can't we say something more meaningful sooner?
I mean, if it's less, if it's also boring. Okay, weak. 3 to
What?
6 months.
Okay, well, that's... Oh. Well, that's all the muck that we have for today.
Indeed.
Yeah, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it around. We really appreciate any supports. Yeah. Right now, the thing that's most helpful to us is just
Giving
sharing it with
Jacob
people
money.
who... Sorry, what?
Giving Jacob money.
No. Is sharing it with people who you think will enjoy it and appreciate it, because we're a new podcast. So with that said, I guess we will see you next time.